All right, let's get started like we normally do. You've all done this before. Short period of bell meditation. So just remember the instructions, and I'll give you a moment, get into a nice meditation posture, and we'll begin at the sound of the bell. I go for refuge to the Buddha, the teacher. I go for refuge to the Dharma, the teaching. I go for refuge to the Sangha, the taught. I take refuge in the Buddha. I take refuge in the Dharma. I take refuge in the Sangha. I have taken refuge in the Buddha. I have taken refuge in the Sangha. I have taken refuge in the Dharma. 3 pure precepts. Cease to do harm. Do only good. Do good for others. Bodhisattva vow. However innumerable all beings are, I vow to lead them all. However inexhaustible my delusions are, I vow to extinguish them all. However immeasurable the Dharma teachings are, I vow to master them all. However endless the Buddha's way is, I vow to follow it completely. Swaha. All right, so today we're just going to talk about selflessness, being selfless. This is a big thing in a Buddhist practice. But there is this pervasive, and I'm going to call it an American worldview, because I'm not sure if it has the same impact in the European countries. But I certainly know in America it does. We have this American worldview that gets kind of almost welded to our psyche. From the moment we're born, when our mom and dad looks at us in the bassinet and they go, "Ooh, you are special," or they say, as you grow up, "You're number one." And then culture and experiences as we live and grow, and we're in society, we're continually having this idea nurtured that you come first. Everything you do should be for you. And, of course, getting others to do for you is considered a sign of strength. So it's all about you, you, you. Well, we got to admit, this particular idea does have at least, this idea of you come first, it does have at least some validity in a Buddhist practice. What it does is it becomes this ideal that we have to develop first a realistic view of ourselves, and then we have to go on and develop the intent to undergo wholesome transformation, before we can go out and offer any of our services or gifts or skills to others. Our experiences with the Dharma, if you will. So with that kind of ideal in mind, Buddhist practice does in fact begin with an I, or with a guide for us to first undergo personal realization and personal development. Right, that's first. We take care of ourselves first. Thought and action must then be set aside so we can focus on social engagement rather than focus on the self. We want to engage in social engagement aimed at the promotion of human flourishing and the alleviation of suffering. And we want to do this through things like volunteering and accepting others and, of course, generosity of spirit. The unfortunate thing is that the American ideals of altruism and generosity often get tainted with expectations of recognition and future benefit for themselves. So we start out thinking selfless, but we can find ourselves really getting into selfishness pretty quickly if we're not mindful. Undergoing transformation from this idea of self or permanent self to not self, or the impermanent self, if you will, and then finally to a selfless doer of good actions without expectation is the path of a bodhisattva in training. This is a path of doing for others without regard for self-gratification or benefit. It's kind of what selflessness hinges on. Now, there is a particular sutra. It's called the Vajrashadika Prajna Paramita Sutra, or something easier, the Diamond Cutter Sutra. And it illuminates that even a strongly held need for self, this diamond of belief that many have as the core of who they are, can be excised. Coming to the recognition that there is no permanent, unchanging self, and then realizing that the ideal of not self leads logically to selfless thought and action, then as a practitioner we can begin to better grasp the teachings of the Buddha. Oh, give it a moment for these. They're going away. Good. Now there's a whole lot to experience in the verses of the Diamond Cutter Sutra. If you have the urge, find it somewhere online or wherever and read it. There's a lot of interesting things that go on. But we can just look at the title alone as a lesson on reaching the realization of selflessness. Just the title. Because it starts out with Vajra. Vajra simply means diamond. And the diamond is here a metaphor for the craving of a permanent state of being, or that permanent self. And it's a craving that can be extremely hard for us to deny. If we can hold on to a permanent self, if that's a reality, we don't have to work as hard, right? Once we get ourselves to a certain point in our lives, if it's going to be permanent, how we think and how we act, we don't have to work on it. But if it's an impermanent self, one that's changing all the time, well, then it gives us work to do. So a belief in self is a major hindrance in a Buddhist practice until we learn to cut it. And that's what Shadika means. Shadika means to cut. And this is how the sutra gained that word cutter in the title. You might often hear it called just the Diamond Sutra. Or you can hear it called the Diamond Cutter Sutra. So like the Bodhisattva Manjushri, we must cut away the delusion of a permanent self so that the realization of selflessness can begin to arise. And then prajna. Prajna is the knowledge through experience that grows out of compassion for all and insights into the realities of the causal universe. It is fully realized wisdom. And then paramita, this is the ideal of getting past delusions to a realization of contentment with how we are. In other words, becoming content with, I am who I am, and I can change. But as I go through my changes, I'm going to be content with where I am in the moment. Doesn't mean I'm going to like it necessarily. Doesn't mean I'm going to dislike it necessarily. But it does mean I'm going to be content with it. But it also gives us a realization of contentment with how we imagine we can be. So content with the idea that you're moving in a particular direction, that you want to be something different, and hopefully a wholesome difference, right? So the intent of the title then, we can put it into this phrase: cut away the ideal of a permanent self to fully realize the reality of selfless intent. Keyword, intent. Now, selflessness, as I said earlier, this is not the norm in Western cultures, especially in America, even though you hear much about the value of, say, of volunteering to help others. Often, we connect selfless with things like getting into the best college because, hey, volunteer work looks good on your transcript. Or we want to present a charitable image to society, to our friends and our neighbors and all that. Well, that's because it makes us look good. Now, the good done has value, absolutely. But the selfish intent subtracts from the individual accomplishment, at least from a Buddhist perspective. Because the doer, the person who has done the giving, has given merit to others, but has not shared their own merit. Individualistic cultures place more value in personal accomplishments than in societal charity and compassion. Sure, there's charity, but there's also tax deductions. And I want to say here, for a Buddhist, taking a tax deduction isn't wrong, right? It's there, it's for us to use, we should use it. Unless the initial intent of the generosity was specifically for that tax break. Then it becomes a selfish thing. So it's intent, right? Now, there is compassion, say for chosen people or animals. Right? Some people will have a particular animal that they really are passionate about and they really want to see it protected. But for a Buddhist, the compassion that we have, it's got to be non-negotiable and it's got to be all-encompassing. Sure, we might like pit bull dogs the best and we have compassion for them, but we want to have compassion for all the other canines too, right? And all the other felines and all the other reptiles and on and on. So it takes effort to achieve a selfless state of being in this culture and time that we live in because we get inundated with all the opposite ideas. So what do? Well, developing selflessness is like any other Buddhist practice. We begin by changing behavior, both thought and action. Engaging in and even contemplating acts of generosity and charity will gradually lead us to this idea of selflessness and help it along to becoming a spontaneous way of being. Over time, the body-mind rewires itself, and the realization arises that a potential for wholesome change is dependent on the idea of the not-self, of that impermanent self. Because only with that acceptance of that reality can we go on and be that selfless person. We can act and think with selflessness. So there is a text that has this quote in it. It says, "And I say, O Subhuti, that a bodhisattva performs the act of giving without staying in things. They perform the act of giving without staying in any object at all. They perform the act of giving without staying in things that you see. They perform the act of giving without staying in sounds, and without staying in smells or in tastes or in things that you touch or in objects of thought." Unquote. Well, the phrase staying in, this refers to holding on to or becoming attached to something, right? You stay with it, or it stays with you, either one. So a bodhisattva in training gives and doesn't regret the giving. They give because the object, action, or thought really isn't theirs, it's just a phenomenon. There is no mine, so what is given away is recognized as transient or temporary anyway. The bodhisattva in training is only the temporary holder of an impermanent phenomenon. So whether you give somebody $1 or a smile, it's just something you're holding for a while. It's impermanent. It's a phenomenon. You can give it away. You don't have to regret it. To perform acts of charity, or just really simple little good deeds, and to give without expectation of recognition are pure acts of selflessness, as long as they're done with the right intent. And that intent is to help others, to do what needs to be done for others. But what these can become are secret acts of charity that in Japanese Zen are known as intoku. Intoku, or good done in secret, doesn't have to be some grandiose gesture like walking around the streets handing out $100 bills to strangers. It can be as simple a thing as just picking up trash from a neighbor's yard, which one of my neighbors did just this morning, and I had to open up the door and look out and say, well, thank you, I appreciate that. It can also be as simple as, we talked about this just a couple of days ago, holding the door open for someone who has their arms full of packages. But secret doesn't always mean that no one knows who performed the act. The secrecy comes from a little different angle, if you will. The motivation for good done in secret is that the person performing the action is not seeking any recognition for what they did. If they get it, wonderful. A nice thank you, or depending on the situation, a tip even. But it's not expected. They're acting selflessly, or with selflessness. So I like to reconstruct old homilies or aphorisms, if you will, and you know the one, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. That's a very big thing, especially in the Judeo-Christian attitude of, love thy neighbor and all that. But what if we changed it just a little bit for Buddhism? And it's this: do unto others as you would have them do unto others, just don't tell them. That's selflessness. Do unto others as you would have them do unto others. Just don't tell them. So that's good done in secret. That's selflessness. That's in token. So it is not the recognition of our acts that is important. It is the positive causal consequences of our actions that is. By being selfless with our intent, we set the example that others may follow. And in the actions of a bodhisattva in training, generosity of spirit is a major practice of damping down and eventually allowing that more selfless person to arise. Now, there are three general aspects of acting selflessly or acting with selflessness. So there's three different ways that you can look at this. You can be a 100% activity-oriented doer. If something needs to be done, you do it with full attention until it's done. That's it. That's a selfless act. There's the idea of we go first. Don't waste time and energy waiting for somebody else to take action that needs to be taken. Just do it. Take the action. If you can. And this ideal includes how we treat others as well as what we might give to others. A mature Buddhist offers respect and trust first, without any expectation that it will be returned. So let's start with that. You should be willing as a Buddhist to offer your trust and your respect without any expectation. It's not the idea as a Buddhist that somebody has to earn our trust or earn our respect. They already have. Simply by being a human being, they've earned that. So we have to be able just to offer it. But realistically, it is difficult for us to not want it returned. Right? That's a difficult frame of mind to put ourselves in. That I'm going to trust and respect, but they might not give it back to me. But here's the deal. You offer your trust to someone. Well, any changes in the social interaction between you and that person that proves that that trust has been misplaced, you can take it back. So we offer it freely to begin with. We go first because that's the selfless way to be. That doesn't mean that you have to continue to trust or respect someone who does something that has an interaction that makes that not viable anymore. So let's say they don't have to earn trust and respect, but you can certainly unearn it and then have to earn it back. But we'll give it to you first. And then the last one is just get in front of your ego. It doesn't matter if it's your job, really. It doesn't matter what you're going to get out of it, really. And it doesn't matter how we will appear to others if we do it. We just do it. These are questions and concerns that arise from the ego, from a selfish view. Selflessness doesn't require answers to them because it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if it's our job. It doesn't matter if we're going to get anything out of it. And it doesn't matter how we appear to others as we do it. We do it because it needs to be done. That's selflessness. And direct experience has proven that these thoughts turned to actions work. Selflessness, when combined with acts of compassion and altruism, have a powerful positive effect on your personal character, number one, as well as positive causal effects on the world around you. Being selfless involves putting aside your preferences and your expectations completely and bringing your focus on performing the duties because they need to be done. And hey, you're the person at that moment that can do it. Analogies in the West to being selfless or acting with selflessness. The biggest one is being a parent or being in a harmonious relationship with a loved one, because both of these type of relationships, they take high levels of selflessness if we're going to be have a harmonious and happy result. A parent committed to the flourishing of their children may set aside their own preferences and desires to achieve that goal. Creating and maintaining a harmonious relationship can mean setting aside one's ego in order to do what's best for that relationship. But in both situations, it requires developing an intuitive awareness of the needs of those involved. And that intuitive awareness arises when one views others with an open heart and an open mind and looks beyond what they might clamor for, what they might say they want, and instead focus on what they need. And by the way, you see this in parenting a lot. You know, kids say, oh, but this is what I want. This is what I want. But a parent has to look past that want and look to the need. Unless the needs are met, and then, hey, the wants. That's an okay thing. So there is the tendency for a practitioner to venture into thoughts of what they think someone might need. And that's when the ego can kind of intrude if we're not careful with the idea that, oh, wait a minute, I know best. Rather than letting the mind, this wonderful sense organ that we have, determine the reality of need. Excuse me. So Siddhartha gave us a guide to how the world really is, and a guide to monitoring our own actions in the Four Ennobling Truths. He didn't lay down dogmatic rules to follow to the letter, because that would have been diametrically opposed to the Buddhist ideals of individual responsibility and of being in each unique moment as it is. When practiced with appropriate view and intent, being situational is a selfless way to approach the reality we deal with from birth to death. So, what is so important about thinking and acting selflessly? Each selfless thought and action strengthens our personal character in a wholesome way. But it also will strengthen all the other aspects of our Buddhist practice. So, what about practicing selflessness, though? I mean, that's all about selflessness. We kind of know what it is and how it arises and all that. But what about just practicing it? You know, how do you know when you're acting with selflessness? Well, there are two aspects of selflessness: thought and action. We can think selflessly and we can act selflessly. And both of these things are interdependent on what is our intent. That's what determines if we're acting selfishly or selflessly. Because a state of selflessness will only arise when there is no self-centered intent. If any thought or action is predicated on how you will benefit, then it is not selfless, it is selfish. Even if others will derive benefit, the core intent centers around what the self will get out of it. But, and I mentioned this earlier, this doesn't mean you shouldn't consider how you will benefit. It just means that that cannot be the deciding factor in how you think and act. So if you're about to do something, for example, doesn't matter what it is, if you're about to do something and you know it's going to be good for say, the person that you're about to take the action for, but your thought is first, wow, I hope they thank me, or I hope they give me something, or I hope I get some recognition for this, then the whole idea of selflessness is blown out of the water. It just became selfish. But if your thought is, or your intent is, I'm doing this to help this person, and oh, by the way, I might get a little benefit out of it, well, then that's a difference in intent. Now you might think, wait a minute though, hold on a second. If I have any intent that I'm going to get something out of it, doesn't that make it selfish? Even if it's the secondary intent or the tertiary intent or further down the list than that, doesn't that make it selfish? No, because the initial intent was to help others. You're just recognizing that you're going to get something out of it. If nothing else, it's going to strengthen your practice. It's going to strengthen your personal character. So we know we're going to get that out of it. But that's not our intent, our initial intent for taking the action or having the thought. All right.